Hey folks, it's regular guy here, and today I'm going to talk about Plato, but not just about Plato. I'm going to kind of use Plato as a jumping off point here. Now, I'll just assume that you don't know anything about Plato, okay? And I'll just tell you the bare minimum that I think is probably, relevant here. So Plato wrote a long time ago in ancient Greece, and we think he was a student of someone named Socrates. Okay, now Socrates is famous guy, famous name, I should say, but he didn't. As far as we know, he didn't write anything. We don't have anything that Socrates himself claims to have written. What we have instead are dialogues that were written by Plato. Okay, we have they're sort of like little plays. Okay, where Plato has Socrates argue with somebody. Okay, and so they're collectively called the Socratic dialogues. And Socrates is kind of like sort of like Superman. Okay, like he always wins. Yeah, he doesn't even have kryptonite. Well, he does lose one time. It's kind of interesting, but um, in every one of these dialogues, it's just it's like a comic book. You know how it's going to end. You know it's going to end with Socrates just defeating somebody. And Socrates has a technique that he uses where he never claims to actually know anything. He claims to be an idiot. In fact, what he does, he just asks questions. That's all he does. Okay. And so just by asking these questions, okay, he puts people in a box. All right. Now, I read Plato in high school. I read Euthyphro. Forgot about it. Didn't care. You might have the same experience. Okay. Later on, I came back and read this stuff just kind of on a lark, and I liked it. And I thought in some ways it was the perfect form, of a style of argumentation. Okay. So in my mind, a lot of people would say this. Okay. A lot of people have been saying this is why Plato still gets read, is because people today are, a lot of people still say that, he did it better than anyone. Okay. This style. Okay. This comic book superhero type style. Okay. It's been copied by others, but a lot of people say that Plato did it best. All right. And how do you do something well? Okay. How do you do this kind of thing well? Well, you make it funny for one thing. He makes it funny. You make it kind of gory, sexy. Um, you know, you have a lot of in the Batman comics, there's like you have a lot of punches and it says bam and stuff like that. You got to punch it up. So that's part of how you make this stuff engaging. It's probably also how you prevent people from tampering with it later on. Like if somebody wants to edit Plato and make him say something else, good luck because it comes at you from so many different directions. So anyway, Euthyphro, I'm spending a lot of time introducing this here. Euthyphro is one of Socrates' victims. Okay. What happens is Euthyphro bumps into Socrates at a late stage in Socrates' life. Okay. Socrates is sitting outside the courthouse, basically. They call it the Porch of the King. And he's waiting to be put on trial for a crime. Euthyphro sees him there. I guess Euthyphro's, used to be in the courthouse here. It sounds like he might be, something like a lawyer. He's, whatever. And so he's surprised to see Socrates there. He says, "What are you doing here?" Socrates says, "I'm on trial for a crime." And Euthyphro goes, "Who accused you of a crime?" Socrates says, it's I don't know. It's some guy named Meletus. I barely know him. He says he's a young and unknown person. Okay. So it's just some stranger popped up and accused Socrates of a crime. And Euthyphro says, "I don't know him either. What do he accuse you of?" And Socrates goes on to describe how Meletus is, being exemplary here because he's protecting the youth. He's protecting the youth, because they're the future. Just like a farmer tends to the young plants, Meletus is protecting the youth from old men like Socrates, uh, particularly like the ideas that old men like Socrates have in their heads. Okay, corrupting the youth, his old man ideas. All right, and now here's the thing. When Socrates was alive in ancient Athens, they had something like freedom of speech, as a right. So you couldn't put somebody on trial just for, saying things you don't like, okay? So they had to, like gin up this charge against Socrates. Now, if you dig into the real history and, all this kind of stuff, Spartan invasions and Alcibiades and stuff, you can see the argument, but it's the same thing today. If you want to put somebody on trial just because they said something you don't like, you could do it, but you're going to have to link it back to like a whole lot of political crazy stuff that, went on over a period of years or whatever. You're probably not going to be able to do it over just, like something they blurted out on Fox News, on one occasion or something. But on the other hand, maybe that's the opposite's true. Maybe you just gotta say something once on Fox News and you're done. But anyway, back then, they had to come up with a way to put this guy in prison or worse. Okay, so they accuse him of making gods, novel gods, and not acknowledging the old ones. Okay, sounds kind of weird. It's kind of a stretch, It always is, right? So, Euthyphro sees that right away. He says, yeah, such things are easily misrepresented to the many. It's easy to say that, he did something that, was technically illegal, but, whatever. What's really going on here is that, these people envy the people that are making these accusations against you. They're like envious of people like us because people like us, we can speak our minds and say all these things that are, that they're afraid to say. Okay. And so there's some kind of jealousy. That's why they're putting you on trial. They're jealous. And then Socrates says, it's actually something else. He says, you know, he says, you're kind of quiet. Okay. I'm loud. All right. I make too much noise. Okay. He says, Euthyphro backs him up. He says, yeah, I have no great desire to, have these people come at me and, say, I don't want to listen to what they have to say. And then Socrates says, it's probably because you barely make yourself available, and you appear unwilling to teach your wisdom. And, I'm so loud that, I'd pay people to listen to me, that's how obnoxious I am. And anyway, Euthyphro's like, whatever, Socrates, I'm sure you're going to do fine at trial. So Socrates says, all right, what are you doing here, Euthyphro? Like, are you, what's your business? And he says, I'm prosecuting somebody. Who are you prosecuting? He says, my father. All right, so there's your record scratch, okay? Euthyphro, Socrates, by the way, if you know anything about Socrates, he's facing death right now, okay? But this dialogue is going to be about Euthyphro and what Euthyphro is doing in court, okay? What Euthyphro is doing is he's trying to put his father in prison, okay? Or, I don't know, put death or something. All right, he's accusing him of murder, all right? Socrates says, geez, I don't know. Most people wouldn't know how to act in a case like that. And he says, what, he killed one of your relatives? And Euthyphro says, no, actually, I killed a murderer. Okay. One of my laborers got drunk, and then somebody, provoked him, just provoked another one of our household. So another laborer that belonged to his father, it turns out. And then, like my drunk laborer slit this guy's throat and killed him. So then my father was, like didn't like that. So tied the guy up, threw him in a ditch. And then he sent his interpreter of religious law. He said to, go find out what should be done. Okay. So, you know, he's got the perpetrator bound, throws him in a ditch, sends the interpreter to go ask the judge what to do. That's how they did things, I guess. But during that time, the guy in the ditch, he neglected him. He didn't, go over and feed him or give him a blanket or anything. So the guy died. Right? And so, that's murder. That's what that's what Euthyphro's saying. Okay. So, there he is. All right, now, Socrates is saying, "Hey, this seems kind of nuts. Are you sure this is okay?" And Euthyphro says, "Yeah, I'm sure. I studied the gods, and I looked at what the gods think is right, wrong, what they punish each other for, what they punish people for, or what they reward them for." And I noticed that, Zeus at one point, had an issue with his father and did something to him, and his father punished his father. And so I think, I'm doing the right thing here. Okay. Um, and at that point, Socrates says, "Look, I think, I should become your student." Okay. And he says, "Because look, when I get to court and Meletus is accusing me of corrupting the youth, I can just say, hey, look, I'm a student of Euthyphro. And really, if you think what I'm saying is nuts, you got to, charge him because he's corrupting the elderly. Okay. It's not me, it's Euthyphro. Okay. Put him on trial. And, see how they feel about that." And then Euthyphro says, "Yeah, if they did that, I'd win for sure." And he says, "Man, I'd make the trial I'd put them on trial, that's how it'd go. They wouldn't lay a finger on me." All right. So Socrates is saying, "Look, I hear you. All right, let's go. Now, just tell me, let's get back to what we were talking about here. Okay, you're telling me that what you're doing here, prosecuting your father, that's like holy, that's pious." He's like, "How do you know whether something's pious? Okay, how'd you know that was pious? How do you know anything's pious?" Okay. I mean, but let's start with that. How'd you know that was pious? All right. He says, "Look, I claim that what is pious," this is Euthyphro. He says, "what's pious is what I'm doing now. Like what I'm, prosecuting the guilty. Okay. Putting the guilty in prison. Don't we all agree? Don't we, don't we all agree that murderers should go to prison? Okay. Right? That's pious. There you go. All right. And then, here's where he brings in Zeus. He's talking about Zeus and his dad, okay, putting his father in bonds, whatever, okay. All right. Socrates says, do you really believe that all that stuff?" Euthyphro says, yeah, I believe all that stuff. And I believe, there's a lot of other stuff I know about the gods, by the way. I'm a real scholar of, like, the gods. And so Socrates says, "Okay, so you believe there's really a war going on amongst the gods with terrible feuds and battles and many other such things, such as are recounted by the poets and the holy artists, all right? The things that they draw on these vases, and the robes and everything, all that stuff. You think that all these wars are going on? Is that true, Euthyphro?" And he says, "Oh, Socrates, you don't even know the half of it. Like stuff they put on those jars, stuff those poets are talking about. Like that's just, skin deep. Like you couldn't even handle it if I told you, what's really going on." All right. Socrates says, "Wow, so we'll get to that some other time, but let's get back to this, my question. How do you know whether something's pious? All you told me was that what you're doing is pious, but I'm saying, I'm asking you what's pious." All right, Euthyphro's going, "Look, uh, I told you what was pious." And Socrates is, keeps bothering him about this, okay? I'm not reading the whole thing. I highlighted big portions of this dialogue to illustrate a few things when we get to this section of this dialogue. Socrates has got Euthyphro. This is, your Bam in the Batman comics. Euthyphro's going, absolutely, indeed it is. Yes, it was. Okay. So, notice Socrates asking questions. Okay. And he's getting Euthyphro to agree to him. And he's walking Euthyphro into, like, contradictions. Okay. He's saying, you know, um, when, for example, when there's a disagreement over quantity, okay, we can just settle that with a calculator, right? Just count. Euthyphro says certainly. He says if we disagreed about whether something was bigger or smaller, we just go and measure it, right? And Euthyphro says that's right. And same with weighing, about heavier and lighter. And Euthyphro goes, how else? So, this is how these dialogues go. All right. And then Socrates says, so what topics would divide us? Okay, what issues could there be that would trigger anger, that would cause us to go to war and make us angry at each other? Okay, that would make us argue about whether something's just or unjust. What are those topics? Okay, and then I put in pink here. Isn't it these things that divide us and about which we're not able to come to a satisfactory decision and so become enemies of one another whenever that happens, whether it's me and you or any other men? Now, I put that in pink. I'll come back to that later, page 7. Okay. All right. So getting through this, you see Euthyphro's agreeing, Euthyphro's agreeing, Euthyphro's agreeing. And Socrates is telling him, so you still haven't answered what I was asking. Okay, you still haven't told me what's pious. You just keep telling me what are some pious things. Now, I mean, in formal logic terms, he's accused. What he's doing is he's asking Euthyphro for necessary conditions, and Euthyphro is only giving him sufficient conditions. So, if I say, give me a fruit, you can satisfy that by giving me an apple, right? And so what's happening is Socrates is saying, well, what are fruits? And Euthyphro is saying, well, here's an apple. That's a fruit. Okay. And Socrates is saying, no, but what's a fruit? And then Euthyphro might say, well, here's a banana. That's a fruit. And Socrates is saying, okay, but I'm asking you, what's a fruit? And Euthyphro's never giving him a definition of a fruit. He's never telling him what a fruit is. So Socrates is saying, like, what's piety? What's pious? You haven't told me what that is. You just keep giving me examples of things you say that are pious because the gods like them. And, I put, in yellow here, there's no end to these arguments, both outside and inside the courts, since people commit so many injustices and do and say anything to escape the punishment. Okay? Euthyphro points that out at this point here. There's no end to these arguments. Now, Euthyphro started out claiming that there was an end to these arguments, okay? He claimed to have it. At this point, he's long since dead, okay? Like, in these comic books, Superman kills the villain, on, like, page 3. And then by, like, page 16, he's just, he's like bringing him back to life and killing him again, okay? And so that's where we are right now, okay? All right. So, when there's let's see if we can get to some interesting parts here. Okay. He says, look, what evidence do you have that the gods think this man was killed unjustly? Okay. Getting back to what you're doing here. Let's just use that as an example, Euthyphro. Like what? Okay. Tell me how you know that's pious. Okay. Because, give me an indication of how, in this case, more than all others, the gods think that this action is proper, okay? What's happened at this point is that Euthyphro has said that, like, things are pious if the gods all agree, okay, that they're pious, okay? So let's give an example. Let's say everybody agrees that red roses are pretty, okay? Euthyphro is saying that if everybody agrees, okay, that red roses are pretty, then we know that red roses are pretty, all right? And Socrates is saying, but wait a minute. Isn't it possible that red roses are just pretty and that's why everybody likes them? You know, couldn't it be the other way around? All right. And so, Socrates' way of putting it makes more sense, right? Maybe red roses are just pretty and that's why people like them. Dolphins like picking up, making bouquets and stuff too. And, the other animals put on shows, with their feathers and stuff. And, maybe that's just natural. That maybe that's why they're red, maybe that's why roses look that way. Uh, you know, so Socrates is pointing that out. And at this point, Euthyphro, he's kind of broken down. Um, he says, I could explain this to you, but I'm not sure it's worth my time. And I'm not sure it might be over your head. He's kind of doing that kind of thing. Socrates says, okay, so let's see again, Euthyphro, whether it's well stated. Or will we be content and simply accept our own definition or the definition of others, agreeing that it is right just because somebody says it is? Or must we examine what the speaker is saying? You know, uh, if we had to examine what the speaker is saying each time, that'd be a pain in the ass, wouldn't it? Right? And what if we have to keep doing that for 2,400 years? Okay, that's kind of why people were still reading the youth fro. It's kind of why we're still reading youth froze, because we're not done with this argument. Okay. Um, okay. So, and here's Socrates. Think about this: is the pious loved by the gods because it's pious, or is it pious because it's loved? Okay. So Euthyphro's saying, things are pious, like me prosecuting my father because the gods love it. Okay. Uh, but Socrates is saying, but isn't it maybe just that the gods love it because it's pious? So he keeps doing this. So, and he says, I don't know what you mean, Socrates. So anyway, getting on here. All right, lovable because it's loved. Do the same thing. All right. And now Euthyphro saying, I have no way of telling you what I'm thinking, because somehow whatever I put forward for us always wanders off and doesn't want to stay where we put it, right? I mean, if you thought I was rambling earlier, Plato's telling you that wasn't an accident, okay? All right. And, I got the colors backwards here, but Euthyphro's saying, I can't keep up with what you're saying, Socrates, And Socrates saying, put your back into it, you blessed man, since what I'm saying is not difficult to get your head around. I mean, Socrates is just insulting him. He's just giving him the middle finger, you know. And then, we get down here, and I should linger on some of the portions that I highlighted here, but you can see that they're going over, the same concepts. Okay. And then we get down, all right, to this last part. Don't you see that our discussion has gone around and arrived back at the same place? Okay. That's what Socrates says to him at one point. Remember, I told you he's always asking questions, right? And he's got Euthyphro still agreeing with them, right? He's very much so, I think, he's got him agreeing with him. He's saying, I certainly do, right? But Socrates is showing him, don't you see that we're just going in circles here? Okay. And then look, he says here, we must begin again from the beginning to examine what the pious is, since as far as I'm concerned, I'll not give up until I understand. I mean, just won't let up. All right. And then Euthyphro says, some other time then, Socrates, because I'm in a hurry to get somewhere and it's time for me to go. I got a court date. I got to go prosecute my father. Like, I got to run. And then, Socrates says, oh, what a thing to do, my friend, says, wish I could learn from you so that I'd live better for the rest of my life. Which is kind of a joke because Socrates, life isn't going to be much longer, but I don't think they're really friends here. Okay, so, going back to, what I said at the beginning, a lot of people would say that, Plato did this better than anybody else. Okay. Plato just, nobody else topped Plato ever since. Okay. So then, what about this for a second? All right. So, we all know, there's jokes about, Confucius said this, Confucius said that. Well, that's really how they wrote, in the Analects of Confucius, okay? And they're really short, okay? If you're looking for like, Confucius to lay out, a treatise on something, forget it. It doesn't work like that, okay? He just gives you, little snippets. All right, so what happens here? Duke O'Shea says, among us, there are those who may be styled upright in their conduct. If their father have stolen a sheep, they will bear witness to the fact. And then Confucius says, among us, in our part of the country, those who are upright are different from this. The father conceals the misconduct of the son, and the son conceals the misconduct of the father. Uprightness is to be found in this. That's it. All right. That's now what I'm reading from. Technically, is the 13th. I guess you call them the book of the Analects. There's 20 of them. All right. So this is number 13. And then this is chapter 18, okay? But that's it. The chapter is 2 sentences, okay? If you go on and see what the rest of it, different people talking about different stuff here, okay? So that's all you get, all right? Now, when this was first presented to me, I kind of thought about it as like a thought exercise. What if you just gave somebody, these 2 sentences here, no context, okay? So they take those 2 sentences and then write it into a dialogue. Write it into a dialogue between, these 2 people. Make it interesting, make it punchy, make it sexy, make it short, right? Don't make it too long, right? Don't put anything in there that you don't need to say, okay? All right. Could you do better than Plato? That's kind of like the thought experiment, that I have in my head, because I think a lot of people probably could, honestly, I mean, going back to Plato here, okay, the part stuff I had in pink, put the pink stuff in there because I thought, in a lot of ways, it's just Plato talking to Confucius. Isn't it these things that divide us and about which we're not able to come to a satisfactory decision, and so become enemies of one another whenever that happens, whether it's me and you or any other men, okay? That could be, Plato or Socrates or whoever talking to Confucius there, in that comic book. You haven't answered what I was asking. Okay. Must we examine what the speaker is saying? All right. Now, I mean, obviously, Plato and Confucius weren't talking to each other. So, I'm making this up. This is kind of Star Wars. Don't you see that our discussion has gone around and arrived back at the same place? Okay. So, I got those 2, all right, 4 or 5, lines in pink there. And, I'm putting them up against Confucius. And I'm thinking, whoever wrote, Analect 13, chapter 18, and, I'm sure there's, don't even try to go there, okay? But, whoever wrote it seems to have done a better job, I would say, than Plato, in terms of like brevity, getting to the point, starting a discussion. Now, I will say, too, that it's a little unfortunate that the Analects of Confucius don't really get read this way. It's my understanding that, not a lot of people are reading the Analects this way, that if you study the Analects Confucius in China, that they have pre-selected statements that you're supposed to learn. they tell you like, oh, these statements are more important than the others. Don't forget about the others, and then the ones that are important, everyone learns. And, nobody sits down and like reads through all of them. And well, some people do, but not too many. And they tend to be foreigners. They tend to be Westerners. So, and like me. And so they, come to it with a different perspective. But I'm looking at it from a point of just kind of admiration, because I think it kind of exemplifies how you can, have some of these discussions sometimes. You know, you might actually be able to, do better than Plato, right? Without even realizing it. Anyway, I'm the regular guy. I'm going to end the video there. Signing off. Sayonara.